For this video today, we're going to be talking about the therapeutic benefits of nature for children. As I've mentioned in the past, I am a parent, child, and family educator through Stillwater Schools. I've also been running my own parent, youth, and family coaching company for the past 12 or so years, and I've taught with 3 different nature preschool programs. I have been very passionate about young children's mental health for many years, especially when I was observing the benefits that children were having to their mental health when they were spending time in nature. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about infant and early childhood mental health before we talk through the benefits, just to give you a little bit of background about what we're seeing in kids. This research right here is from 2006, so it is a bit outdated, but even still, just thinking about how we know things have increased since then. Approximately 9.5% to 14.2% of children birth to 5 years old experience an emotional, relational, behavioral disturbance. 9.4% of children aged 2 to 17 years, approximately 6.1 million, have received an ADHD diagnosis. 7.4% of children aged 3 to 17 years have a diagnosed behavior problem. 7.1% of children aged 3 to 17 years have diagnosed anxiety. 3.2% of children aged 3 to 17 years old have diagnosed depression. I'm going to jump past that slide. It's really important to really step back and look at what might be some of the causes for infant and early childhood mental health struggles. And when we're talking about those percentages, they may not seem very high, but it's still higher than it should be. And we also know that those numbers have increased through the years. Parental loss or a loss of a sibling can be one situation that can lead to struggles with mental health in children. Caregiver substance abuse, caregiver mental illness, especially in mothers. It's amazing how much, even though we know dads have such a huge impact on children's lives, there is just something different about mothers, and that mothers do have, when it comes to mental health, a greater impact on their kids. Exposure to trauma, either experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect, or witnessing violence in the home or even in the community. Family financial strain, parental unavailability. I know a few of you mentioned in the first week's assignment about how busy families are, and it is really important for us to step back and wonder about how much of that busyness could feel to a child like unavailability. Sometimes when we think of unavailability, we might be thinking that the parent is, like this picture here where the parent is maybe spending too much time, drinking or consumed with social media or other things. But it can be even if the parent is thriving in life, but they're just not having time for their child as well. And that goes right along with the family overschedule too. I want to back up just a little bit to the caregiver mental illness. Not only can it have an impact on a child if the parent is struggling with mental illness as they're raising their children, but even if there's just a family history of mental illness, something that's just important for families to keep on their radar. So if their child is having struggles, to make sure that that's mentioned when they talk with their pediatrician or an early childhood therapist. So the therapeutic benefits of nature for children are many, and we're going to walk through them. I'm going to be able to share some activities that can be done with kids to kind of build on that. Mostly, I'm going at this from the lens of those that are working with kids in an education or childcare, which I do view childcare as an education environment either way. So I just want to make sure that's clear. Not everybody necessarily views it that way, but I do. And really thinking about how even though we certainly are not therapists when we're working with kids, we still can help support their mental health and can be providing activities that would be beneficial to them and can really help kids thrive. So I love both of these images here because this is how young kids interact with the natural world. And we have, as we walk through the lab school and the child care center the first week, we noticed the gear hanging up and talked a little bit about the importance of gear. And the one of the biggest things is, yes, we want kids to stay warm. That's a huge piece, but also we know that they interact with the natural world in a much different way than we do as adults. We have inhibitions that are different, that have kind of come through the years where kids don't. This little guy who wanted to fully be in the mud, like he literally laid down in there, and how wonderful for him. And this little girl on the left here, how she's like really wanting to like lay in that snow. And for those of you that haven't taken time to do something like that ever, or in the past few years, I recommend taking the time for that. Lay down in a pile of leaves and make a leaf angel. Lay down in the snow, smell the snow, sit down on the ground and touch the earth. We as humans have a tendency to, or a desire to be one with nature, and that's what biophilia is. And it does something in our system that can't really be repeated any other way. I was with a little girl today. She's 9, and I asked if she likes when it's raining out. Her and I, we were talking in Spanish at some points, and we were talking in English at other points. And she said yes, but she might think it's silly. She used the Spanish word for silly, which I'm not thinking of what that is right now. And I looked at her like, why? And she said, when it's raining, I like to touch the earth and lift it up to my nose and sniff it. And I got the biggest smile because I thought, yes, like I totally get it. And I explained to her that I didn't think that was silly at all, that I thought it was wonderful, and I like to do similar things. Another thing is just how much it can improve self-regulation. This little guy that is pictured here really struggled with self-regulation. He was very, very, very busy, and we love that in kids. When it gets to be hard, though, is when we can see that they're not having the ability to slow themselves down, and even with assistance, they're still struggling with that. Well, pets can be really motivating for kids to slow down, because if this little guy were to start wiggling a whole lot, the rat might bite him, the rat might jump out of his arms, the rat might do something, might even pee on him or go to the bathroom in other ways on him. And so because of that, it is very motivating for kids to build those self-regulation skills, because it's right there in front of them. Even if we're providing other ways that might seem like they would be motivating for the child to regulate on their own, sometimes it's an animal that does it. Even if you're on a walk in the woods and you see some deer up ahead, to pause with the kids, because if they keep running, the deer are going to run away. And so it becomes quite obvious quickly to young kids what they need to do with their body. And many will be able to do it. Certainly, we want to make sure that wildlife and any domesticated pets are being taken care of, and that we're not just relying on the child to regulate on their own. That we do need to be near them, because we don't want animals to get hurt in our care when children are there. Another thing that I'm sure many of you have heard, that are going through the developmental psych program, is just about cortisol levels, the stress hormones. And being outdoors really can reduce those stress hormones. It can bring your blood pressure down, your heart rate down, and just something to kind of keep an eye on, even in yourself when you're outside. Just do a check and like, oh, where? Obviously not when you're like walking across campus, but just when you're just sitting outside, how does that differ than if you're sitting indoors, or even if you're sitting at a park doing homework, as opposed to sitting in your apartment or dorm when you're doing homework. You might be able to notice that difference. And this is where we would love to see even more research take place, specifically on this and what's happening with kids when they are spending time outdoors. The outdoors also is a great place to foster creativity and collaboration. There are so many things, and you can always make things up too in programs. But this particular program, we actually did have a pumpkin patch that we needed harvested. And now, granted, we plant the pumpkins for this purpose. So, but the kids don't necessarily know that, right? They see that, oh, we have all these pumpkins out here, and we need to get them across the farm. And so it's on this day, this was a parent child class. I did specifically ask the parents to kind of step back and let these 2, 3, and 4 year olds figure it out together. And I was there to provide some guiding words. There were some tears because some kids were frustrated and used to their parent helping them more than I was helping them, but they're also not necessarily used to being in a big group like this either. And so, it can be anything from pulling weeds together to digging up and maybe prepping a garden bed for some planting. But just when kids have the opportunity to do big things together, excuse me, it can really foster some great friendships because of that collaboration. Um, and it's interesting too because when we think about how children feel about themselves, one of the things, when children are physically competent, that overflows into their other areas of development more than other things. So if a child, for example, is very socially competent, it doesn't necessarily build their confidence in other areas. It might, but it's been found that children, when they are very competent physically, that does flow into their other areas. They move into learning to recognize letters and interacting with their peers with more confidence than if they don't have a strong physical base. And so that's another huge piece that kids can get in nature-based learning environments. This little guy on the left, I love how hard he was working to climb over this fence, and I love that it's just a reminder that kids of all abilities can do a wide range of things. We decided to add this style into our play area after reading Balanced and Barefoot, which is one of the books that is required for this course, because we realized we had a lot of lower body activities within our play area, but we didn't have as many upper body things. And so that's where we decided to build the style so kids could be climbing between our two play areas. We added in some rope swings and a climbing ladder. And it's interesting to just watch children build their self-esteem through those physical challenges. And that's one of the things when therapists are doing nature-based therapy or nature play therapy, there's that physical element that isn't going to be there in many settings when therapy is taking place inside. And so it really is an added benefit that a lot of places don't necessarily have access to. Another piece that is really important for us to consider, and this you could take this visual and you could think about it in a lot of different settings, but in the setting with this situation, I'm thinking about it with nature-based learning. We all have our comfort zone, right in the middle, and we can easily identify, articulate what that looks like for us, how we might be feeling when we're in the comfort zone, what our bodies might look like when we're in the comfort zone. And then I'll get to the challenge zone in a little bit, but then there's the danger zone where we are not okay. We're really nervous. We might show aggression. We might have some panic. We might get into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. We're in that hyper arousal. And again, you can probably easily think about what that feels like to you and what that looks like. So between that, though, is that challenge zone. And as you can see, all of these levels are fairly equal right now. And when someone's in the challenge zone, you're on high arousal, but there's also that sympathetic and ventral vagal systems that are or are working together, hyper vigilant, but not too much so. Like you're playful, excited, but you also might be a little bit nervous. So more is going on, more is being activated than if you're just in that comfort zone. Now, when children are spending time outdoors, they are having opportunities to move between that comfort and challenge zone pretty frequently throughout their day. And as teachers, it's important for us to be watching for that. Like, okay, have they been in that challenge zone too long? Are they starting to feel like they're getting to that danger zone? What can we do to provide some comfort, to kind of bring them back, and then they're ready for that challenge zone again, and just kind of how that can go, kind of in and out. And I'll be curious to kind of hear your observations of that when you're observing children in play at the lab school, to see if you can see when they're in that challenge zone or when they're in that comfort zone. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes in our current culture, we are not allowing children to get to that challenge zone. And we are wanting them to be so comfortable that when they do get to that challenge zone, you can see that circle is pretty small. That challenge zone circle is between comfort and danger. They very quickly feel like they're in the danger zone. And so, for example, if a child has never climbed over a stile before, right? Many kids coming to preschool would not have had that experience, and that's okay. So, as they're climbing the first time, a child that has not been challenged much um, might start to scream and cry and panic and feel like they're in danger. Whereas a child that has, even if that child hasn't been on a stile before, that climbing thing, they have been challenged in other ways, they might get nervous, but they're not going to get to that danger zone. Now, we know that temperament can play into this as well, but it's really important for us educators, and those of you that are parents, to be thinking about, am I keeping this child in the comfort zone too long? And this is something that I really, when I'm working with parents, I challenge them to think about. It's not helping their child to always be comfortable. Part of childhood is being challenged, is being uncomfortable, is being sad, is not liking things sometimes. That's part of the real world. We're there to support them through those times. Um, but we don't want that challenge zone to be so small that they feel like they're in the danger zone when they're only being challenged. And again, nature-based learning just allows naturally for children to go in and out of that comfort and challenge zones, those comfort and challenge zones. So mental health, most of you in the class, I feel like have a strong sense of this already, but I just want to read this part here for those of you that maybe don't have as much background on mental health. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. Mental health is important to every stage of life, from childhood and adolescence through adulthood. We all have mental health. There might be times that we're struggling with our mental health, and there are going to be times that we are kind of thriving with our mental health. Nature-based, so I'm just kind of moving, sorry, I wanted to give that. We're going to move into some nature-based activities to support children's mental health. So risky play is of huge importance. Ellen Sandsetter has termed, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. She has claimed 6 areas of risky play that every child needs throughout their childhood. Great heights, so that might be swinging really high, it might be climbing high. High speeds could be sledding, it could be riding a bike really fast, dangerous tools that might be even using a hammer or some screwdrivers, dangerous elements, having exposure to fire, rough and tumble play, it might be wrestling, getting lost. Now, all of these things might feel like, whoa, this is way too much. We will be able to talk through how we can help children feel and experience some of these things without it feeling being a hazard, because there's a difference between a risk and a hazard. A risk, you might get hurt, but you're not going to get severely hurt as long as everything has been thought through by the adults around there. A hazard, something really terrible could happen. Somebody could die, they could get severely hurt. So there's getting lost, for example. We're not going to take children somewhere and not watch them, right? Like that would not be good teaching practices or parenting practices of very young kids in any way. However, we could create spaces within our play areas that allow children to feel like they're getting lost. For example, you could plant a sunflower house, or you could plant some lilac bushes where they can go in and play, and you can still see them, but they can feel lost. Push-pull activities are wonderful for children to use their muscles as they're pulling. Wheelbarrows, wagons, rolling logs, moving rocks, or other loose parts. This is meeting a need for kids that they can't get in many other ways. And so thinking about what you might be able to provide for kids in your outdoor spaces that could do that. This is something that a lot of occupational therapists build into their work with kids. If you have ever been around a child that doesn't seem like they have a good sense of themselves in space, maybe they're bumping into kids a lot, maybe that might even look a little aggressive, or they're knocking into things or pushing on you. They're the kid that comes running up to you and gives you the biggest hug and it's almost a little too tight. Those are kids that need a lot of sensory input, and they really benefit from these push-pull activities. So it's coming out in positive ways instead of that banging up against other kids that doesn't always end well. Digging, one of my strongest memories as a teacher was a boy that was in my class. He was 4 at the time, and his older brother was dying, and we knew that he was in the process of dying. And I went over to his house on the weekend to support his family during that time. That may seem a little odd, but I will be honest, I very much view myself as a human first before a teacher. And so if I do know that a family needs some support and I'm able to provide it without crossing too many lines, I am often I often make that effort to do that. At any rate, I went over and I ended up taking my student, the little boy, over to a park nearby his house because it was really getting close with his older brother, and his parents just really needed some time with this little guy out of the house. And so we walked over to the park. We brought a couple shovels and some toys, and he dug and dug and dug and dug. And as he was digging, he started talking. Again, he was just 4. I did know him pretty well, but we hadn't talked a whole lot yet about his brother's situation. It didn't often come up at school because he was so engaged with his peers at that time that it was kind of his escape from that. But he was going into such detail about what was happening with his brother and how his parents were feeling. And it was amazing to see him processing. And I am confident that the digging was what was allowing that to come out for him. And we noticed that when he was back at school, especially those next couple weeks after his brother had died, that he needed to be digging. We needed to have shovels out, and we needed to allow a lot of time for that. And sometimes words would come, and sometimes they wouldn't, but he always seemed calmer and more ready for kind of our next activities if he had time for that. And we didn't say to him, "Oh, buddy, it's time for you to go dig." We just had it out as one of the many options. And we continue to see him gravitate to it. And we continue to leave that as an option until we noticed that he wasn't going to that anymore and that he didn't have that same need for it. If you ever have done some digging, like maybe digging a shrub out or digging a hole to plant a shrub in. Perhaps you felt something like that before, but it's very, very amazing to watch that in action. Sensory play is so underrated. I think I mentioned it in one of our classes when we were walking through the class, and I was pointing out that huge sensory table. Sensory tables are a must in any early childhood setting, and even with really, really little ones, it's just so important to have. I have animal oats pictured up in the top right. I don't recommend that people use people food in sensory tables in programs because that could be food for a lot of families. And animal oats or corn, animal corn, that can be tossed out for animals to eat when you're done with it, and actually can be used for quite a long time. Where rice, it's just kind of done when you're done with it, and nobody's going to eat it, but it was people food. And so just a little side note with that. Clay is another really great sensory experience that is bringing us closer to the earth. It's very earthy. It is part of the earth, and it has that kind of sense of biophilia too. Mud can have that same feeling, and same with water. And so when you are in spaces with kids, especially if you're feeling like they're pretty high up and they need some calming, great activity. I believe this picture on the right was one of the first days of school. I often, if I have access to two sensory tables, I will often have two out on the first week of school with preschool age kids, because it can be a good way for them to work, kind of regulate their emotions if they're feeling a little sad with their grown-ups having left them. Activities that provide purpose and a sense of accomplishment. I think we all know how good it feels to complete a task that we know needs to get done. And young kids love that. Once they're 8 or 9, it feels a little different to them. But when they're really young, they want to be big. They want to feel and do the things that you get to do as adults. And so really looking around play spaces and thinking, how could the kids help us better this area? So when we notice that we need more wood chips in our play area, I haven't done this with a toddler age group of kids, but with preschool age kids, I won't have the buildings crew spread the mulch out. We'll have the kids help us. We have them bring their wheelbarrows over, rake it up. It takes much longer, of course, but the sense of accomplishment that they feel and that I know they're getting from it is completely worth the extra time. I'm not going to play this video right now, but just thinking about ways that animals can be incorporated into classrooms as well, and the ability for kids to build that relationship, especially for kiddos with that have ASD that might struggle to connect with people, are sometimes like the most beautiful with animals. And so just really thinking about how you can incorporate that in. Another one, this was an activity I did where I had a child wearing a GoPro. I actually don't have them wear it on their head though. I put it on their chest. But this was just, it was just an adventure where we were hiking around looking for things. And so just being out exploring, that could just be walking on a sidewalk and looking for things. You don't even have to necessarily know what you're looking for beforehand, but just going slow. And a lot of times you'll find things that you wouldn't have noticed if you were just walking by yourself, right? Young kids tend to notice things. You might find some ants across, walking across. You might find some other bugs. Definitely worth that time. And just providing quiet time. Books on a blanket. You can do some small world creations or pretend play. I love this picture of this little girl laying on her back. She actually has a rock on her tummy. Those were our calming rocks that we had. Each child had a big rock that they decorated, and we used this to kind of practice some self-regulation things within the classroom. And so we'd have the rocks lay on their tummies, some would lay on their chest, and they would do some deep breathing. And just what a gift for them to not only be learning that skill, but also to be able to do that outdoors. Um, that is all I have for this on here, but I will also share in Canvas a handout that talks about if you're seeing certain things in kids, different activities that you can do that are all outdoor based that can help meet those needs. A lot of times when we're observing challenging behaviors in children, there are activities that we can do that will help us support the child in a better way. And added bonus is we might see less of those challenging behaviors, but that's because we're actually going to be meeting their need. It's not just a quick fix. It's really looking at, okay, when they're showing this behavior, it means, this, and that. And so these are the activities that are going to support that, such as the example I gave of the child that's constantly kind of pushing into other kids or knocking into kids or knocking things over. That's a child that needs a lot of sensory input. And so let's think of activities that are going to provide that so it's not becoming a disruption to his peer interactions. Let us know if you have any questions.